Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. The gang is back together. The summer is coming soon to an end. Kids are back in school. And so here we are, gathered together once again. Erik from deep in the bowels of Texas. I don't know what I was going to say there.
Well, sometimes it does feel like that.
It's warm as a bowel.
Kind of. Sometimes it feels a little closer to the exit than the entrance, but
yeah,
definitely nice.
Yeah, shallow in the bowels of Oregon. Joe Rollins.
Hey, it's good to see you guys. Yeah,
you've always been kind of a shallow bowels guy.
That's me.
As far as I know.
So my resume. Yeah. I don't know if that helps.
You might want to get that updated.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I've got anymore.
I wouldn't lead with that.
It's in there somewhere, I guess. Okay.
2011 to 2022, shallow in the bowels. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, all the way to 2022. Yeah, about 4 years worth, I guess. There's nothing else to put in there. So yeah. So the hot topics today.
Yeah.
Chris, you had so many ideas coming in, so it's hard to kind of
I just want to start by saying we had a great idea that Joel ruined because he said he needed time to prepare. For those of you who are listening, that's me doing air quotes and mocking my co-hosts for wanting to, I don't know, spend a semblance of time getting ready.
I'm not an encyclopedia of swimming knowledge like
for your
Chris.
For your top 18 and under swimming performances idea. So my version of time to prepare, that means maybe in 2-3 days you'll forget about this topic and I don't have to talk about it.
Right.
So you haven't really deciphered the code, but I think you're on to the front end when you realize he's not preparing anyway. Well, no, so he's now just stalling. Yeah.
Now we're teasing it on the pod, so we're accountable. So check back in a week because we're going to have a fantastic podcast for you where we unveil our Mount Rushmore of top junior swimmers ever. And maybe even we'll do both genders in the current rule of the algorithm, which is please find a way to mention David Popovici on your podcast and it'll get 10,000 times as many views as your average one.
So when you're leaving us with absolutely no topic to talk about today, I actually thought about something with David Popovici. So like last time we spoke, actually they had there's a few good comments in the comment section about about that loping stroke that he has. And so I started kind of thinking about that a little bit. And the idea, like in his race, how he's able to maintain his distance per stroke on the back half is pretty incredible. It'd be nice to actually have the numbers that go along with that, but it's just the eyeball test of watching that, because you see, I mean, we've always been told about how maintaining distance per stroke is always the key element of sprinting, and you got to couple that obviously with your cycle rate, and generally the distance per stroke goes down, cycle rate has to go up. And I've been thinking about with that loping stroke, I'm wondering if it's a couple things that go on there where you've got obviously as the race goes on too, your breathing rate typically goes up, and there's got to be like an optimal rate of inhalation, an optimal rate of exhalation to also time in with the optimal cycle speed that you're racing with. And that's the kind of the cool thing about swimming, is the idea that obviously there's no other sport that has these moments where there's absolutely no breathing going on, or having to time your breath into the aerobic component of it. It's so you're breathing in within the tempo of the stroke, and so it might not be optimal for everyone. So maybe this loping stroke creates a little more time for that inhalation and the exhalation. But then I started looking even further into it a little bit, because the thing Boomer used to always say is, look into nature. If you don't see it in nature, then you're probably not going to work for humans in an athletic event. And so we're always thinking aquatic things like a swimming fish or something. Generally, they don't have like a loping movement. But I mean, that's the key is we're not aquatic We're, you know,
They don't
animals,
need to breathe above the water.
right. We're pretending to be aquatic animals. It's the best we can do. We're hoping
Right.
to kind of get close to it. So if you look at any other animals, like, you know, like a horse trot kind of thing, where there's kind of a loping movement to it, started looking into that, and they measured that horses, like a certain trot, use 33% less energy for that same kind of speed. And so I'm wondering if there's an energy component. So like there's all these different layers that kind of start to mesh, where you're conserving energy, where you're optimizing the amount of time you need to inhale, and then also optimizing the amount of time you need to exhale. And the other part about swimming, which is something that like no one seems to really bring up, is that exhalation is so huge, in just you're regulating the acid base balance, but also the fact that no one mentions is you're breathing against pressure, you know. And I think that's why, like, you know, when they do running, they'll fit you up with like a breathing valve and just have you run on a treadmill and measure CO2. The thing is, swimming, if you do that, now you're no longer breathing against pressure. Right. And so it's different, you know. So the intercostals and things are always being activated to exhale, because you have to force out the water a little more.
This is a really important.
I'm sorry.
This is a really important point. I'm just going to interrupt you because
now
you've
go
been
ahead.
talking for a while, and I want
Sorry,
our audience to hear.
Everyone.
No. I actually want people to understand the point that you're making there when you talk about pressure. You know, so when you're standing on land, you exhale really naturally, because of the difference in pressure between what's inside your lungs and what's outside your lungs. But that changes when you put those two lungs into a body of water, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So what becomes passive now has to be at least somewhat active. Right. And so that's the interesting thing, is when you see like Popovici underneath the water, looking at the air that he's displacing just by exhaling. Yeah. You know, and that was the thing too, we've seen like with Ledecky, you know, in her swimming too, and, you know, before the Olympics, like just how powerful she was on that aspect as well, which is kind of a weird thing to call powerful. Like, wow, it's really working.
She really exhales. Yeah.
But that's such a key part of it, you know, and so that's the part I've really been kind of stumped on here with that loping kind of a stroke, or the gallop kind of stroke. And we've seen that a lot with distance swimmers, and sometimes freestylers. You know, one of the things as we pointed out was like Popovici's loping stroke kind of comes from him riding on that opposite arm that he breathes. So if he breathes right, then he's kind of riding on that left arm a little bit longer like that. So he gets up a little bit higher and kind of creates that bounce. But one of those where you're like, you know, is that something that you teach? Is that something you just kind of allow to develop? You know, because if you start to try to teach it, now you're teaching it based on like, you know, who's optimal inhalation rate, you know, versus allowing it to develop. But again, is it allowing it to develop at a point where they're just like, you know, they really shouldn't be on their side that long? And so that's why it's such a fine line at what level you kind of allow kids to experiment and try to hash that out.
Right. And I mean, I think Erik, like, you were going to come on here and talk about something that I think, you know,
all of
back in the day when I swam still, I always like to do too, which was just try stuff out myself. So you've been actually playing around with the loping stroke.
Yeah. I actually had been thinking about it for a couple more days than I actually went through with it. Just trying to think about as I was swimming normally, which recently hasn't been all that great. But just trying to wrap my head around the benefits of it, stuff like that. And then yesterday, so bear in mind, I'm trying to get back into what would be a consistent level of swimming and training and stuff like that. So about halfway through my daily swim, you know, I thought to myself, well, I'll do 3 sets of 3 100s yards, freestyle on 130, 50 easy, kick on my back, not really an interval. So maybe about 2 minutes. And then just kind of go through the first 2 rounds as I normally would, which always starts with a much better rotation and evenness and stroke, and then it just kind of careens downhill on the back half of each of those. Again, still not doing very well in shape, but
just set the scene for us. Like, what does your natural freestyle look like? Like what you default do? What does that look like? You think
it's not a loping freestyle. So the idea is to try to keep the stroke consistent and rhythmic. albeit mostly breathing on the right at this point.
Okay.
But I am, it's weird. My right side on my freestyle is my stronger side. I do right with my left. I do a lot of finer movements with my left side. The right side is more the power. I throw right. So I guess it's a little bit, maybe I'm more leaning towards being able or should be doing a loping stroke because of what I can feel in the water is a strength discrepancy from the two sides. So somebody like that may truly benefit from it. Obviously, you want to not have a bunch of irregularities in your strength from side to side, but from what I can tell in on that last, as I went through the set trying to swim the hundreds even pace. So mentally I was negative splitting, but physically I was even splitting these hundreds. So it was just like, for whatever reason, the effort, the first 50 is always easier, right? So just trying to maintain integrity and then try to push through it and keep the second half, which was working. And then when I got to the third round, the first one of the three, I swam like I did the first two rounds because I knew the first one was going to be a bit easier. And then I was like, okay, round two, number three in that last set, I'll try a light lope. It wasn't Jason Lezak, Michael Phelps, University of Michigan style stuff back in the 90s kind of lope, but I was making a conscious effort to have some kind of shallow rhythmic lope to it. And I was not putting in any extra effort to maintain my velocity, or at least it didn't feel like my exertion went up a significant amount, but I was going from like 107 high to going to 105 just by going into a loping stroke, and then end up being like 104 on the last one, 104 high. But some of the things I noticed while going through with it is a lot of stuff that Joel alluded to. We had an anonymous commenter on the video who said he was an age grouper, but had some really profound thoughts on how it related to butterfly swimming.
And his name was gynecologist.
Yeah. So it was just such a weird.
It was altogether extremely confusing.
Yeah. So shout out to him for being a master swimmer age grouper with the handle gynecologist, commenting about something somewhat theoretical and actually really quite plausible. So he talked about how that loping could be much more associated with butterfly and fly movement and dolphin kick. And as I'm going through this stroke and I'm trying to put my mind in that comment, as like, well, this actually does feel like a very shallow butterfly. It just happens to be that I'm doing one arm at a time, and it's just a little bit of a different rhythm and approach to it. I found myself being able to clear the water so much easier into the breath, just because I was taking that inhalation and I was holding it as I was essentially rebounding in and off the water, which, Joel, I think you kind of did a display this at UW Milwaukee, where you pushed a water polo ball down and forward and it kind of bounced out in front, kind of just as an example of the lungs and their relationship with the water. So it felt like to me like I was able to, like I said, get into that breath a little easier, rebound, and as I'm holding my breath, I'm pushing down and forward onto that water, which is essentially helping my weaker side get through that side of the stroke so I can get it out of the water and get it back over and maintain that rhythm. It really did feel like I was higher on the water. It felt like the effort that I was putting in it did feel lighter, and obviously based upon the clock, and it was going faster. Now my effort did go up, but you just kind of have to take my word for it, and that my incremental increase in effort didn't seem as much relative to the change in my velocity and my ability to finish the 100. So 2 seconds faster, but just the way that I was able to come into the final wall on both 100 number 2 and 100 number 3 felt a lot different. And one of the other things I noticed, and then you guys can talk as little or as much as you want about it, is that I can't remember which one of the two 100s on the back end, which one of the 25s, I try to start with a normal breakout like I was earlier in the set versus getting into the lope right away. And that was really difficult. I could tell that it took me at least one full cycle, if not two, to get into that lope stroke again. So going right from my breakout and immediately transitioning into that stroke right away, if I didn't do that, it took more effort to get to that point and then be able to maintain that velocity. So it was just like, get it going right away and then just ride it.
Now, Joel, do you think the point of that story was to teach us something about loping stroke, or do you think Erik wants us to know that he's in his 40s and training inconsistently, but can still push 104s in practice? What do you think?
I had to float really long after that last one, though.
Yeah.
Joe shared us a set where he went a 50 on 35 as one of his intervals. Don't think I didn't forget that.
How did we end up here? I'm sorry, I must have blacked out. I thought we were.
I'm trying to pass the buck.
I see that. So I think what you're saying is like if you have that loping stroke, maybe it kind of creates that harmonic movement. I remember, I forgot when it was, but maybe it was the early 90s or late 90s, something like that, where in Japan, they were really experimenting a lot with kind of like a harmonic freestyle, harmonic backstroke, where they had a lot of bounce to it. And then everyone was like, oh, this is ridiculous. But then it's one of those things where I think a lot of times when people see something new, they're just like, it doesn't fit into my paradigm. That's the dumbest shit ever. We're not doing it. But I think there might be something in there too, that really, again, when you experiment out, you find these things out. And so like basically like a single arm freestyle is kind of, could be something where single arm, not freestyle, but single arm butterfly, in a sense, kind of you have that harmonic movement, which might help with, decreasing, the amount of heartbeats you need for the same kind of velocity. And so you see that, like, obviously we transferred to the underwater kicks. Part of it was, the drag underneath the water, but the other part was you covered more distance with 2-3 dolphin kicks versus 6 strokes. So you're basically exiting with a lower heart rate. Maybe part of that is just the harmonic movement is less force producing, which would be less lactic acid producing. And so maybe you can hold off, generating, a certain amount of lactic acid by kind of doing a harmonic freestyle or a harmonic backstroke. Or also I was kind of thinking where so a lot of coaches kind of try to tie in like that opposite arm, opposite leg kick thing, or maybe that, and that was the thing we talked with, I have trouble with the guys.
Juka.
Yeah, Juka was saying where basically it's kind of like crawling, where infant crawls right arm forward, left leg forward, versus the infant that would crawl right arm and right leg at the same time, kind of the parallel movements like that. Yeah. And so I wonder if that loping stroke kind of rides the balance of both of that, where you're kind of sinking in the opposite side of your body into the arm catch, and therefore tying your whole body into it. And they always talk about core getting involved in it.
Much better connection.
Well, connecting the whole body with it. Yeah, sorry.
But I think there's a cost benefit to it too.
Yeah, right.
There's one thing to be a huge lope. When you go so deep, there's too much to carry up. So
sure.
It seems like for anybody, especially a guy like Popovici, who rides really shallow given his stature, like there's just not a lot of him to sink.
Right.
So he's really kind of skipping across the surface of the water like a stone.
Yeah.
Which is like Erik's woman in Sweden, Solstrom. Same thing where they ride naturally very high in the water.
Did you get called Erik's woman in Sweden?
Erik's woman. Yeah. The one who's always like, hey,
like Sarah's just one of Erik's girlfriends or something.
She's taken. Unfortunately, she's taken.
You can keep dreaming. But I think part of it is like if you look at swimming more like if it was like skateboarding or something, where you already have the body moving through the water at a certain rate, you don't have to keep on digging in, and it's like starting fresh each impulse. It's like you have an impulse, the object's already moving. So the body being the body of the skateboarder, the body in the water, the single arm impulse is just to maintain the velocity, or actually in swimming, it's like just so you're not decelerating as much. You're just trying to maintain it. And so if a single harmonic movement or that timed in loping stroke is enough to kind of keep the body moving at that velocity, it might take a lot less energy than always thinking like, you've got to plant and drive really hard. And again, creating more force than's needed to maintain a tempo.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I thought about in listening to both of you talk, like, I think there's a point that runs through both of you talking about this. And that is, I think just in general, naturally as human beings, we tend to value symmetry, like it's,
Right.
People who are thought of as beautiful have, the most perfectly symmetrical faces, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some aesthetic quality, I think, where as swim coaches, maybe we lose our minds a little bit and we think we're synchro coaches because we're going like, that looks good. So therefore that must be what makes people swim fast. And all these asymmetrical, imbalanced movements look ugly to us. So we think, well, those must be bad because they're ugly. But the truth of the matter is you have all these people, and Erik, I think you did a great job pinpointing how sort of asymmetrical a natural human body is. It's not perfectly symmetrical. So why would you move it in a perfectly symmetrical fashion if you have these sort of strength imbalances, motor imbalances in the way that you move? Maybe the ideal way for you to move is completely asymmetrical.
Yeah. At least
I think part of it is like with
yeah.
Like my wife and I went to Tanzania years back, and so you just watching like a herd of animals moving or something like that. You see how, again, the ones that are something that we look at asymmetry as basically like a sickness or an illness, because right away your eyes are drawn to whatever animal is kind of lagging at the back of the pack that's asymmetrical. And I think that kind of ties in with that, where again that stands out. And so you see a group of swimmers going. There's always something that stands out, and generally for us, there's something that stands out at the front of the pack, something that just looks right, moves different, and then there's always something at the back of the pack where it's like this isn't doing it, where there's just way too much energy going in for so little payoff at the end. And so I think that's the thing, is we're always trying to like make one thing look like the other versus allowing something to happen. And I think, like, again, you look at like age group coaches, like the first thing you're telling every kid, hold your head still, and no, we never like say, okay, we've accomplished that. You don't have to stop holding your head still. So, I mean, from the time they're like 6 until they're in master swimming, they're really focused on holding their head still. It's like, you know what? You don't have to be that still. It's like, it's like if you're walking and you hold your head still, you look like an idiot. It's like there's an amount of fluid movement that goes even in something that looks like it's still. And so that's the thing, is allowing that fluid movement to happen with the athlete and allowing them, again, to develop their stroke as it goes. But again, part of that is that fine line of like, what is it in there that's that's not going to help them down the road, and what is something that might be something that could really enhance their swimming down the road.
It's funny because it's such an oversimplification of something that you are trying to do, keep your head still.
Sure.
But it's way more complicated than that statement, and a lot of age group coaches don't realize that. Like, your neck and your shoulders and everything are moving in order for that head to be still. It's like the same thing of keeping your eyes forward and moving your head and still having your eyes in the same place. It's like there's a lot that goes into it, instead of just saying to a 7-year-old, just keep your head still and everything will be fine. I
remember I had like a 6-year-old kid all the way through when she was 13, 14. She was a really good butterflyer. And I remember, like, when you're literally like, get your head down, because she's trying to, it's like, and so from 6, 7, 8, it was perfect. It was like, everything looked great. And then all of a sudden 9, 10, she got her chin, or she was like, what do you do? It's like, well, she was really intelligent kid. She's like, back when I was 6, she said, get my head down. So she just kept on doing it until all of a sudden, like, well, that's way too far. Okay. We got, so let's bring it back to the realm of something functional. But that's the thing, is when you're only talking about place, and that place really has nothing except for your visual on them. It's like you're watching a kid swim when they're in a horizontal position in the water where they have no idea where their body's at in space. You're like, get your head down. Well, relative to what? Hold your head still. Well, stiller than what? Like rigid, and so there's all these qualifiers that go with it. And so I think that's part of the problem with coaching is the language we end up using. It makes sense to us, but it doesn't mean it's going to make sense to every single kid in the room. Again, it's like our friend Mildred always say, like, kicking has 1,000 different meanings. Some kids, they grew up playing soccer. Kicking soccer is a lot different. Kicking your brothers, kicking taekwondo, or kicking the water. all a lot different than one another. Right. And yet we're using the same word, and just, yeah, they'll figure that out, and it's one where experimentation, like we've always said, is kind of the way to go, but having the time and the facility space to go experiment, and also having the parents have patience enough to go, oh yeah, they're just working stuff out. Well, it kind of looks like they're just, floating around on kickboards and throwing stuff.
Right.
Yeah, they're doing that too, I guess.
That's a natural byproduct. Yeah. No, I think that's all. I'll be really interested to see how this stuff develops, and how the stuff that, if we bring it all the way back to Popovici, and then we'll transition out of it, how, he's going to certainly mature like any person would, getting into his, turning 18, getting into his 20s and stuff. His body is going to change. And just seeing how his stroke maybe changes, or how parts of it work really well for him as that stuff happens. I think that's super fascinating. And I'll be really interested to see. And it's just overall, it's really exciting. I mean, we joke about people wanting to watch podcasts, and now we can definitely give Popovici a title in this, and get the views, I think, given our conversation. But it is exciting. It is like really super exciting and interesting.
I think it'd be interesting. I think so many times too, as coaches, we're like, well, let's get the workouts. Let's get the workouts from this time he's 7 to 8 all the way up, because it's something like, I'll just Xerox that, and we'll put these out, and we'll just repeat that, and we'll just start churning these guys out.
Right.
And really, the thing is like, what's his background in movement? As far as in the water, what's the movement? Because I think also I started teaching lessons again. I've got some kids in there that needed to get in the water, and so a lot of it is kind of like your body's always going to it has like a library, and it's going to link back to whatever it's learned. And so some of them, kicking breaststroke looks like walking up a stairs, because that's what they know until they figure something else out. So a guy like this, who's again is so athletic in the water, you're kind of like, what's his background to make these changes like he has? Because we pointed out before the Olympics, whereas the start was like, right. Would you say elite level? No. But his turns elite level? No. His swim is elite. And now it's like, now he's hitting on those things, and there's still a little probably room for improvement, but still it's like, now all these things are coming together, and to make those changes is like you said, it's pretty exciting to watch. And it's also interesting to know, how some people are able to make these changes, and how some people, like, for whatever reason, they can't get past it. We've talked about like the analogy of Shaquille O'Neal throwing free throws. How come he couldn't just figure that out at some point? And it's like, well, he couldn't. Obviously he would have if he could. And so that's the interesting thing about movement like this. I
think Rick Barry tried to teach him the underhand.
Yeah,
it was going for a while.
He had too big of an ego to do the underhanded free throws. So.
And that goes into swimming too. I've seen
there's definitely a swimming analogy there.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, like I remember like Bill Boomer used to hang out at the pool at Phillips a little bit when they were doing these the videos, and he would talk about some of the swimmers he was working at Stanford with, and so they would come in at like, probably ranked, top 5 in the world in a certain event. And he's like, almost all of them would, like, when you first meet him, like, who are you? No, we're not working on my freestyle. Like, hey, why don't we work on your butterfly a little bit? And so you always would take the approach of like, because it is that ego becomes something too, where you're like, this is what's worked for me. This is what's got me to here. I'm going to protect this. Oh, you want to work on breaststroke? I'm not a breaststroker. Again, we start to stereotypes. I'm a sprint freestyler. I'm a sprint flyer. Like, yeah, butterfly, I'm not that. So sure, if it gets me out of a main set, I can do some bobs over here. Let's do it. And that was kind of the way that he would end up, by getting them faster in that event, gain trust to go into another event, but also kind of let the ego kind of calm down a little bit, and like, oh, this is someone I can go to for information.
Yeah. Speaking of ego, somebody that we've given a really hard time on this podcast. So this is my personal anecdote that I wanted to share on this one. I was thinking today about we were all thinking about stuff that's happened while we've been away. And actually we've recorded a podcast since then, but I've been thinking a lot about it. I was at the Futures Championship in Geneva, Ohio, and I ran into friend of the pod.
Not Switzerland.
No.
Okay.
I've
okay.
Actually not been to Geneva, Switzerland, but I have been to Geneva, Ohio.
All right. Which is the Switzerland of the Midwest.
Yeah, I think it's
a
definitely the Switzerland of Lake Erie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I ran into the friend of the podcast, Mike Murray. And we had a
Works.
delightful time talking to each other all the way through the meet. And I want to mention that because I think probably, even though I put in plenty of qualifiers when we did a podcast, giving him a hard time about changing around what was going on with his club, I have never had a personal interaction, like one-to-one interaction with Mike Murray, that I haven't enjoyed on some level. We have plenty of things that we disagree about. I mean, I'm like watching him post pictures from ASCA with all sorts of people that I'm like, no, thank you. But on a interpersonal level, person to person level, actually, we really connected really well. And I think more than anything, the subject that we connected on, and then I found a lot of resonance with him, was just like coach well-being and looking out for yourself as a coach, sort of prioritizing your own health first in a lot of coaching situations. And we had a long time just spent talking about this. And I know I can see that it is actually something quite important to him, and that he's on the same up and down journey that I think probably a lot of listeners of this podcast are. And I know certainly I am with that kind of stuff. So my very short personal anecdote is actually a positive shout out in Mike Murray's direction. And maybe if he could just stop admiring some people that I don't think are worth admiring, we could be totally copacetic.
This is going to have to be an agree to disagree kind of thing. So
I think if you met him in real life, Eric, I think
no, I don't disagree. I mean, I saw,
Yeah, it came out like
saw
you're
the
anti-Mike
podcast.
on that.
Yeah, you did sound a little like,
That was not me.
I'm gonna have to
It sounded
defend you
like
next time I see
Go
him.
back and edit it. Yeah.
Show me the receipts.
Go
Show
back
me the
and look.
receipts where I was.
You
where
said
I was the
agree.
one.
I just made a positive comment about Mike Murray, and you said agree to disagree.
Yeah,
So
that sounds
the
negative.
implication there is
It-
that you disagree,
Not
and
with
you have only
you,
negative things to say
not
about Mike Murray.
with
Yeah.
you.
Seems like
you
a good dude.
and Mike can agree to disagree on specific people that
Yes.
he admires that you do not. Don't
Right.
try to twist my words.
I actually thought that's what you were saying, so now I understand what you're
It
saying.
came
so
off
I'm
like
glad
that,
I'm glad I gave you a hard
Yeah.
time so we could get that explained.
Yeah, we actually brought that up because it did
Yeah.
come off like that. Go, you can look at the receipt. It's in there. It's like, dang, that I did buy that. I didn't mean to. I'm glad there's a return policy.
So I don't know if you guys, I don't expect you to have much to say about my interaction with Mike Murray. And then I don't know if Joel
It's-
did an anecdote or not, or whether him just talking about
That was my
Loping
anecdote.
freestyle for a while was his
he
anecdote.
led into the
Okay.
led into the anecdotal evidence that I was going
Okay.
to present today.
Okay, I got you
Yeah.
guys did a great job planning that together.
Yeah,
You're
no,
awesome.
no idea Joel was going to try to steal my thunder, but I'm
Yeah.
glad I was able to kind of jump
No,
in
no,
and run with it.
You're like the color commentator. I was just saying what's out there, and then you throwing back into your Super Bowl days. You know what it takes to
Yeah.
throw a receiver
What-
open.
like back to the days in the huddle.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, good podcast.
No,
Thanks,
no, no.
guys.
I have one
No.
last thing.
Oh.
No.
yeah,
I have
geez,
one last thing.
Some other people you hung out with that,
No,
that
no.
you found out that you like more than you used
Yeah,
to?
I'd like to actually name drop everybody that I talked with at Futures.
It's
So
not
if
like
you
you
guys could
tag
just-
these
yeah.
in there.
Or
If,
like
if you
how
start tagging them, so you get the
Joel
links.
just happened to drop like when I traveled to Tanzania.
Right. That one time
Well-
that
well, you have to-
when you go to Tanzania and you watch the wild
You know.
animals on the Serengeti run, you guys know how that is.
Well,
but
you
you-
guys are
does.
looking. You guys
As
are
one
looking
does.
for more people to like watch this. If you like link Tanzania, to this, that's at least one, which is now we've quadrupled, just about
I can
quadrupled listeners.
I can get him to turn away. Look what my therapist gave me to
Oh my
read.
God. Oh my
Yeah.
God. All right.
All
Yeah.
right, so great podcast.
Very-
No,
Thanks a lot.
very-
I have
Very
something else to
nice.
say,
Murray Stein's introduction to Map of the Soul by Carl Jung.
but I
All
think
right.
actually we can tag. I will just say I've
You're
one more
gonna
thing to say, and then
Tag
another
Carl
thing to say.
Jung.
We can
Yeah.
probably tag Young and
He's dead.
Tanzania as well, because nobody
Yeah.
has, as far as I can tell, said anything objectionable about Tanzania that's going to get
Right.
angry Tanzanian
Right.
commenters, like another situation that we won't mention.
Right.
And but I was doing research today, and I just feel a need to bring this up because I brought it up to you guys and you didn't say almost anything. But I feel
Again,
a
it's,
need.
it's probably we're just hoping you forget whatever this
No,
is.
no.
Quote research.
I was doing my research
Yeah.
for
Loaded up Wikipedia.
Yeah, I got on Wikipedia for yeah, exactly. That's what I did today. Okay. You know what? And I'm not ashamed of it. I'm actually proud of myself for doing that. Okay. So I was on there and I was looking because when we're going to do this thing next week, I want to do, I think, sort of entry stakes to even be compared.
Are we getting to the point of this, or is this?
I think entry stakes to be compared to Popovici as a junior swimmer is that you broke a world record under the age or at junior age. So I was trying to find like how many men ever, have broken a world record in swimming. And I'm only looking from like 1950 on. And I stumble across this South African swimmer, supposedly. I mean, I think he's a real South African swimmer, but I'm very deeply confused about his Wikipedia page. He's Jeremy Reingold. He has an extremely intimidating photo, and that's why Joel didn't want me to bring him up on the podcast, because he's scared of him. He also apparently played rugby. This is the part where I'm wondering if it's really true. It says in the second line of his biography, in 1980, at 12 years of age, he set the world record in the 200-meter long course individual medley at 2:03:01 in Cape Town. Now, this statement has 4 citations, none of which to me actually prove that a 12-year-old from South Africa did this record in 1980. And just to set the context for people, if this were true, this would mean that this 12-year-old in 1980 swam 10 seconds faster than the current US national age group record for that event. Okay.
And never got faster.
And was never heard from again. Now, 1980, we are talking about an era where South Africa was likely excluded from lots of major international competitions, right? Because of apartheid at that time. So it is a particular time and place where it's conceivable. So I'm trying to figure out which parts of this story are accurate and which parts of it are not. Craig Lord, if you're out there, we need your help, because you might be the only person.
Craig Lord. Hashtag Craig Lord.
Please, Craig. The part of this, I do believe that there was a swimmer from South Africa named Jeremy Reingold who broke a world record in swimming in 1980. That part of it, I can believe is true. I don't really know, to be honest. This is the first time I've ever noticed this, and I can't tell whether I'm just getting old and never noticed it before, or whether this is like a fake thing that has been just like passed along on the internet.
Wait, you're saying that there's fake stuff possibly on the internet?
I'm telling you that you can't trust everything you read on the internet, but I am 100% not buying that a 12-year-old South African swam the world record in the 200 IM. And if he's mad about it, I would be happy to furnish him with Joel's address so he can go beat him up. Okay?
Yeah.
Because as we all know, my objectionable opinions are directly attributable to Joel. And they're not really, I'm like a parrot that just says things that Joel tells me off.
No, Chris, you're actually like the short annoying friend that hangs out in a bar that gets all of his other buddies punched. Somehow someone else gets punched in the face because he goes up, he's like, hey, that guy over there just said this. What? Wham! Like, geez, I don't know why that guy punched you like that, Eric. It's crazy. You should go hit him back.
Yeah. So there we go. I'm casting doubt. If anybody listening to this podcast knows how Jeremy, a 12-year-old swimmer named Jeremy Reingold, who is apparently also a professional rugby player and is mentioned in several articles because he's married to an obstacle course racing champion. Yeah, if anybody knows how this thing came to be, or what parts of the story are true, or whether the entire thing is not true. I would love to hear from you, and I would
Was
love
she
to
on
clear this
American
up.
Gladiators?
I was gonna say
Yeah.
the first thing that came in my mind was like,
Karina Marks.
Never mind. Have a good podcast. All right, thanks. See ya.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
I
Bye.